Imagine standing under 1,000 golden lights as the man who once ruled boardrooms and billion-dollar deals falls to one knee. Not in a grand ballroom, not under the scrutiny of the elite, but in the quiet corner of a small London cafe, asking the only woman who ever dared to walk away from him to stay forever. His voice was steady, but his heart was in his hands, and for the first time, the man who never lost was willing to lose everything if it meant keeping her. This isn't just a story about love. It's about second chances, about finding the one person who turns every battle into a dance, every defeat into a beginning, and every scar into something beautiful. Get ready to be swept away by a journey of wit, passion, and an unpredictable love that even London's coldest nights couldn't freeze. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's begin this unforgettable story together. Astoria, Crown Hotel, New York. A bitter November evening. Outside, the winter wind swept fiercely through the avenues of Manhattan, but within the resplendent ballroom of the Astoria Crown, warmth and glitter ruled the night beneath cascades of crystal chandeliers. The city's most influential gathered investors, business tycoons, prominent journalists, their murmurs and laughter mingling with the notes of a string quartet playing softly in the corner. Tonight was no ordinary gathering. It was the much-anticipated annual press evening hosted by Astoria Crown, a name that had become synonymous with elegance and power, steered by the indomitable Nathaniel Pierce. On the grand stage, a polished row of microphones stood waiting under the golden spotlight. Silk-draped tables, champagne flutes shimmering like stars, and women draped in breathtaking gowns created a spectacle fit for royalty. Yet among this meticulously curated sea of prestige, one woman refused to blend into the scenery, Charlotte Winslow. Charlotte was not there to admire or to flatter. She was not draped in the demure black expected of a journalist hoping for an interview. No, she stood bold in crimson, a dress that hinted at strength rather than seduction. Her dark auburn hair tumbled in loose waves, framing a face where keen blue eyes shone, not with awe, but with wicked amusement. Charlotte Winslow was infamous in journalistic circles. She did not chase headlines about grand openings or philanthropic galas. She exposed the cracks behind the golden facades, peeled away the masks worn by the mighty. And tonight, her target was none other than Nathaniel Pierce himself. Nathaniel appeared on stage precisely on time, a figure carved from poise and authority. His suit, a custom navy piece that caught the light with every step, fit him like a second skin. A man who owned every room he entered, and who carried the burden of his empire without flinching. He despised the media with a quiet, simmering disdain. Not because he feared scandal, but because he understood too well how easily truths were bent, twisted, rewritten. Yet here he was, extending a hand toward the very wolves he mistrusted for the sake of Astoria, Crown's spotless reputation. As Nathaniel answered the perfunctory questions thrown at him with well-rehearsed precision, a single glance snagged his attention like a hook in the side, Charlotte. He knew her name immediately. Her reputation preceded her. A journalist whose ink left scars, but unlike the others, she did not push forward, did not jostle for space. She lifted her glass of champagne in a silent, sardonic salute, before sauntering toward him, with the slow, confident grace of someone who hunted lions for sport. Nathaniel was offering a clipped response to another reporter when her voice light, but edged like a blade, sliced through the noise. "If you distrust journalists so much, Mr. Pierce," she said, a teasing glimmer in her tone, "why host a whole evening in our honor?" He turned, fully studying her. No deference in her gaze. No simpering smile, just bold, unvarnished curiosity and something far sharper lurking underneath. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, his voice a smooth drawl. "I distrust those who write fiction and call it truth," he replied, "not those willing to seek the real story." Charlotte smiled, not wide, not falsely polite, but with a spark of challenge. "Good," she said simply, "because I do not write fairy tales." For a moment, the ballroom's glow dimmed around them. It was just the two of them, two players recognizing in each other something dangerous, something thrilling, and somewhere deep inside, Nathaniel Pierce, a man who trusted no one, realized tonight the real game was just beginning. Nathaniel Pierce's lips twitched just slightly, the first crack in his otherwise impenetrable exterior. "I do not despise the press," he said evenly, his voice low, "only the kind that mistakes fiction for fact." Charlotte Winslow lifted her glass again, her smile lingering at the edges of her mouth. "Then you have nothing to worry about with me." She replied, her words velvet-wrapped but sharp, "I only tell the truth." Nathaniel paused, studying her with new interest. There was no trace of false bravado in her tone, only a calm certainty that dared him to contradict her. After a heartbeat, he allowed himself a private smile. Not the polished one reserved for the cameras, but something smaller, almost reluctant. "I look forward to reading your truth," he said quietly. It was not a declaration of challenge nor of surrender. It was a beginning. Across the crowded ballroom, cameras flashed and voices clamored, but Nathaniel's world had narrowed to the woman in crimson who stood before him without flinching. Charlotte felt it too, a subtle shift. She had encountered countless magnates in her career, men who either tried to charm her into complacency or fled at the first sharp question. But Nathaniel Pierce was neither charmer nor coward. He held his ground with a kind of stillness that was infinitely more dangerous. The remainder of the conference blurred into a background hum. Both were present, yet neither truly there, their thoughts caught in a quiet, invisible tug-of-war between two stubborn, relentless souls. Maybe Charlotte thought Nathaniel Pierce was not just another polished face carved by privilege. Maybe he was something else entirely, something rare. And Nathaniel, he had faced tycoons and politicians, conquered boardrooms and courtrooms, but in Charlotte Winslow he sensed something unfamiliar. Someone not impressed by wealth nor cowed by reputation. Someone who, with a single look, had unsettled his carefully ordered world. He knew it with a clarity that stunned him. He wanted to know her. Later at the rooftop lounge of Astoria Crown, the night wore a darker, quieter cloak. Charlotte lingered by the marble bar, her glass half forgotten beside her. She was nursing her thoughts more than the drink until she noticed him. Nathaniel sat several stools away, a tumbler of bourbon in his hand, the city's skyline reflecting in the steel of his watch. Their eyes met over the dim light, and the smallest of smirks played at the corner of his mouth. "Do journalists not sleep?" he called lightly, raising his glass toward her. His voice, warm and teasing, carried across the few feet of polished floor between them. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, leaning back against the bar with casual grace. "And do CEOs not have spreadsheets waiting for them?" She shot back. This time Nathaniel laughed a real laugh. Deep and unguarded, Charlotte blinked, surprised at how natural it sounded. She had never imagined him capable of such genuine amusement. One drink turned to two, then three, the conversation rolling over topics from lavish galas to the absurdity of owning multiple identical suits just to project an image of consistency. 6 suits that are exactly the same. Charlotte teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she sipped her cocktail. Sounds less like fashion, more like an existential crisis. Nathaniel tilted his head, considering her words with mock gravity. Perfection, he said simply, requires discipline. Or maybe, she countered, tapping the rim of her glass, it just requires boredom. He laughed again, and something inside him loosened. It was unnerving, but also exhilarating. By the time Charlotte was swirling her 5th drink, the crisp edges of reality began to soften. She remembered Nathaniel's steady gaze anchored to hers, remembered her own bold words spilling freer than usual words about him, about the myth and the man beneath it. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel Pierce let go of the clockwork world he had built around himself and simply listened. The night dissolved into a blur, laughter and bold words, mixing with the heady fog of cocktails and something far more dangerous attraction. Somewhere between teasing insults and half-dared glances, the evening spun out of control, and now as the pale light of morning crept into the corners of the Grand Astoria Crown penthouse, reality set in. Charlotte Winslow stirred beneath the heavy duvet, a groan escaping her lips as a stabbing headache pulsed behind her temples. Her senses sharpened in stages, the softness of the sheets under her fingertips, the warm scent of sandalwood in the air, and the undeniable awareness that she was not alone. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, adjusting to the thin band of golden light cutting through the curtains, and there he was, Nathaniel Pierce, CEO of Pierce International. The man she had playfully torn down over cocktails the night before. The man now lying beside her, his lean frame tangled in the bedding, one arm draped carelessly across the mattress. Charlotte froze. For a beat, her mind refused to accept what her eyes saw until it did, and her heart nearly jumped into her throat. Pieces of the night before flickered like fragments of an unfinished dream. His fingers tracing the curve of her spine, laughter warm against her ear, the delicious recklessness of it all, suppressing a rising wave of panic. Charlotte turned, carefully assessing the situation. Her scarlet dress was a crumpled heap on the floor. One stiletto teetered precariously near a leather armchair. A dark silk tie unmistakably has dangled from the armrest, like a quiet witness to her poor decision-making. "Oh, hell!" she whispered to the ceiling. She was not the type to unravel over a one-night stand, but she was definitely not the type to entangle herself with a powerful man who could crush her career with a single, well-placed whisper. Rolling carefully out of bed, Charlotte moved with surgical precision. Her dress slipped back over her body, her heels retrieved and clutched in one hand. She spotted her purse abandoned near a low marble table and snatched it up. Before she could talk herself into doing something foolish like waking him, she grabbed a notepad from the desk and scrawled a quick message. "Thanks for the night. No strings attached." Short, clean, emotionless. Just the way it had to be. She placed the note on the pillow, smoothed her hair with trembling fingers, and slipped out the door without looking back. Nathaniel stirred under the early light, his body aching pleasantly from whiskey and bad decisions. His hand reached instinctively toward the other side of the bed and found nothing but cold sheets. He frowned, blinking away the haze of sleep. Gone. He sat up slowly, the cool air hitting his bare skin, his eyes landing on a small slip of paper left behind. Picking it up, he read the brief message, "Thanks for the night, no strings attached, 8 words. Crisp, dismissive final." Nathaniel let out a slow breath, dropping his head back against the headboard. He was used to orchestrating every encounter, every relationship, every transaction in his life with precision and control. He was never the one left behind. He was never the one left wanting more. Until Charlotte Winslow, Nathaniel Pierce did not often find himself left behind. Sure, he had expected nothing more than fleeting amusement from their encounter, but still he was not a man. Women usually walked away from without so much as a second glance. Charlotte Winslow had not even hesitated, as if the night meant nothing, as if he were forgettable. A slow smirk pulled at the corners of Nathaniel's mouth as he leaned back against the headboard, the hastily scribbled note still crumpled between his fingers. There was a flash of something sharp in his stormy gaze part, amusement part. Something else he wasn't quite ready to name. "Charlotte Winslow," he murmured under his breath. "You think you can just walk away from me?" The challenge thrilled him more than it should have. He wasn't used to losing a game. He didn't even realize he had been playing, and he definitely wasn't ready to let this story end just yet. Waverly Post newsroom. Later that morning, Charlotte pushed open the heavy glass doors, her oversized coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Her temples throbbed with every beat of her heart. "Please nobody speak to me," she warned, beelining toward her desk. But fate, or rather her best friend and colleague, had other plans. Aubrey Lane peeked over the partition, her brown eyes dancing with curiosity. "You disappeared after the Astoria Crown event last night," she said, drawing out the words. "Tell me you didn't." "I didn't." Charlotte cut her off swiftly, sinking into her chair. Nothing happened. End of story. Aubrey crossed her arms, tilting her head like a detective interrogating a suspect. "Really? Because you've got that 'I spent the night with someone scandalously out of my league' glow about you." Charlotte nearly inhaled her coffee the wrong way. "Excuse me." "Oh, come on, Charlie. Everyone knows Nathaniel Pierce could charm the devil himself, and you—" Aubrey's grin widened. "You're the one woman on earth who wouldn't melt in front of him, at least normally." Charlotte focused intently on her computer screen, trying and failing to erase the memory of gray-blue eyes and a smirk that had haunted her all morning. "It was a few drinks," she muttered. "A bad decision. It's already forgotten." But deep down, she knew that was a lie. And what Charlotte didn't realize was that Nathaniel Pierce had no intention of letting her forget him. The following night, London's frosty streets. Charlotte sighed as she unlocked her car, settling into the seat with a bone-deep weariness. It had been a long, grueling day, back-to-back meetings, a deadline looming, and a desperate run to her favorite cafe for sanity. She had even treated herself to a croissant for tomorrow's breakfast. A small, rare victory. The city lights glittered outside her window, and for the first time all day, Charlotte allowed herself a moment of peace, until her phone buzzed. Frowning, she pulled it from her coat pocket. The name flashing across the screen made her stomach flip. Nathaniel Pierce. Charlotte stared at it for a long beat before answering, her voice calm and cool. "What do you want?" Nathaniel's voice came through the line, low and deliberate. "I'm outside your building." She arched a brow, surveying the bustling street around her. "Too bad I'm not there." Silence stretched between them, a taut, breathless pause, and then, steady as ever, Nathaniel said, "I'll wait." Charlotte tapped her nails against the steering wheel, debating whether to laugh, yell, or hang up. She had met countless men, arrogant ones, boring ones, predictable ones, but Nathaniel Pierce wasn't any of those. He was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something she wasn't sure she could or wanted to resist. Nathaniel Pierce, a man who ruled boardrooms without ever having to wait for anyone, now stood outside her narrow townhouse, the London cold biting through even his expensive wool coat. Charlotte Winslow had no idea what he wanted, and frankly, she didn't much care. If he was stubborn enough to wait, then let him. So she took her time. An extra hour at her favorite cafe, savoring a pot of Earl Grey and lazily scrolling through her news feed. She browsed the bookstore next door without urgency, even lingering in the bakery section for far too long, debating whether to buy a second box of pastries. By the time Charlotte finally made her way home, it was well past 10 o'clock. She half expected, half hoped, that he would have given up. But there he was. Nathaniel leaned casually against the wall beside her door hands, tucked in the pockets of his dark overcoat, looking maddeningly calm. Under the glow of the street lamp, he seemed almost unreal, less the untouchable mogul she'd faced at the Astoria Crown event, and more like a man who had lost a round and decided to wait for another chance at the table. Charlotte paused at the foot of her stoop, pulling off her gloves slowly. Her voice broke the chilly night air, tinged with amusement. "What exactly are you doing here?" Nathaniel's gaze lifted to meet hers, unwavering. "You left," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Charlotte chuckled under her breath, fishing in her purse for her keys. "So you waited out here for 2 hours just to tell me that—" He folded his arms across his chest, tilting his head slightly. "I want an explanation." "An explanation?" she echoed, amused. She slipped the key into the lock, but didn't open the door yet. Instead, she turned to face him fully, her expression teasing, "Because I didn't stay. Wear your shirt and cook you breakfast, like some cliché." Nathaniel leaned against the doorframe, now the faintest hint of a smirk touching his mouth. "Exactly. Normally I'm the one who stays in control." Charlotte laughed, a low, genuine sound she hadn't expected. She had braced herself for anger, for entitlement, for wounded pride. But this was unexpected. Nathaniel Pierce standing outside her door, patient and disarmed, wanting not a demand but an answer. She studied him for a long moment, her breath forming little clouds in the freezing air. "Is it your ego that's bruised," she asked, "or your curiosity?" For a long second he said nothing, then a sigh, low and reluctant. "Maybe a little of both." Charlotte blinked, caught off guard by the rare honesty. This powerful, untouchable man waiting here, just to understand why she had walked away, was almost endearing. Almost leaning her shoulder against the doorframe, she squinted at him, weighing her options. She wasn't in the habit of inviting men into her home, least of all Nathaniel Pierce. And yet, without saying another word, Charlotte pushed the door open wider. "You've been standing out here long enough. Come in before you turn into an ice sculpture." Nathaniel hesitated for half a second, then stepped inside, his presence filling the small hallway as naturally as if he belonged there. The door clicked shut behind them. Charlotte calmly shrugged off her coat and walked toward the kitchen without offering unnecessary conversation. She moved, deliberately pouring 2 cups of hot tea as if this were a routine visit, not a surreal interruption of her life. Handing him one, she arched an eyebrow. "No cocktails tonight. And for the record," she said dryly, "last night is not on repeat." Nathaniel accepted the cup, his fingers brushing hers. A faint, teasing glint appeared in his eyes. "Who said I wanted to?" Charlotte smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "You did." Nathaniel let out a low laugh, the sound curling in the warm air between them. And for the first time that night, Charlotte wondered if maybe this wasn't a mistake after all. A rare, deep chuckle slipped from Nathaniel's lips, the kind that always managed to catch Charlotte off guard. She settled into the kitchen chair, hands curled around her mug of tea, her posture relaxed, but her voice still sharp as a blade. "So," she drawled, tilting her head, "what exactly do you want now? A philosophical debate about how men can't stand being the ones left behind? Or are you simply curious whether I regret it?" Nathaniel pulled out the chair opposite hers, his every move deliberate, unhurried. He placed his cup down and leaned in slightly, voice low and measured. "Both?" he said without hesitation. Charlotte smiled faintly over the rim of her cup. "I don't regret it," she said softly, holding his gaze steadily. "But that doesn't mean I plan on making it a habit." Nathaniel rested one elbow casually on the table, his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers. "And why not?" he asked, as if he truly needed an explanation. She arched a brow at him. "Are you seriously asking me that?" He only shrugged, unbothered. "If you think what happened between us was a one-time thing, you're mistaken." Charlotte fell silent for a moment, the air tightening slightly between them. Then she let out a soft laugh, rich with disbelief. "Confident, aren't you?" Nathaniel's smile didn't waver. "Not confidence," he corrected quietly. "Certainty, and I'd wager everything on it." Something shifted in the space between them, a current neither of them tried to fight. Charlotte set her cup down, studying him. In that moment she knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not yet. And whether she won or lost, that was a game neither of them could predict. Since that night, Nathaniel Pierce had no intention of letting Charlotte Winslow slip away, but he wasn't the type to bombard her with roses or flooding her inbox with sweet nothings. No, Nathaniel played a different game, quieter, cleverer, far more strategic. He started appearing in her orbit. Not too much, just enough to make sure she noticed. The first encounter was the next morning at her favorite corner cafe. Charlotte, deeply focused on her laptop, barely noticed the world around her, until a familiar voice drifted over her shoulder. "What masterpiece are you writing today?" She glanced up, and there he was, Nathaniel, casual yet striking, sliding into the chair across from her as if he belonged there. Charlotte blinked at him. "Seriously, what are you doing here?" He shrugged off his overcoat, letting it drape over the chair beside him. "Having coffee," he replied smoothly. She raised a skeptical eyebrow. "There are thousands of coffee shops in London, and you just happened to stumble into mine." Nathaniel's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Maybe it's fate." Charlotte chuckled, shaking her head. "I don't believe in fate, I do, however believe in determined CEOs with too much time on their hands." Unfazed. Nathaniel lifted his cup to his lips. "Dinner tonight." Charlotte leaned back, considering. "I have plans," she said airily. "Something thrilling, like lying on my couch and reading a book about the male ego." Nathaniel's eyes twinkled. "Perfect. I'll offer hands-on research assistance." Charlotte laughed. "Tempting, but I prefer my books quiet." Nathaniel smirked, utterly undeterred. "That's fine. I don't take rejection personally, but I also don't give up easily." The second encounter came. The very next day, Charlotte had barely stepped into the bustling newsroom when her colleague Emily darted toward her, whispering urgently, "There's a man waiting for you in reception. Very handsome. Definitely looks like the successful, mysterious type, possibly an ex." Charlotte frowned. "I don't have any exes who fit that description." When she reached the front desk, her heart sank and fluttered at the same time. Nathaniel stood there exuding effortless confidence in a perfectly cut black suit, like he owned the entire city. "What now?" Charlotte asked, arms folded. "Lunch." Nathaniel said simply, "Come with me." She shook her head. "I have plans." He tilted his head slightly. "With who?" "None of your business." Nathaniel chuckled, his smile infuriatingly patient. "Fine, I'm not in a hurry, I'll wait." And wait he did. Hours later, when Charlotte finally exited the building, Nathaniel was still there, leaning casually against his sleek black car, as if the cold and the passing time had no power over him. She sighed heavily. "Do you really not have anything better to do?" He pushed off the car, stepping closer, his voice low and steady. "I have many things to do," he said, "but none more important than this." Charlotte stared at him, the city's evening lights glinting around them. And for the first time, she began to realize this wasn't about ego anymore. This was about him and her and the space between them that neither could seem to leave alone. Getting a yes from Charlotte Winslow wasn't going to be easy. Nathaniel Pierce knew it, but he also knew he had time. Charlotte studied him for a long moment under the soft city lights, then finally sighed, folding her arms across her chest. "Fine one dinner, but I choose the place." Nathaniel pretended to deliberate, tapping his finger against his chin. "As long as it's not a fast food dive?" Charlotte smirked mischievously. "Pity I was just about to suggest burgers and greasy fries." Nathaniel laughed, a low, genuine sound that lit up his entire face. "As long as you're sitting across from me, it sounds perfect." The third encounter happened at a charity gala that same evening. Charlotte had dressed to impress, a stunning navy gown, hugging her silhouette understated yet undeniably captivating. She had just taken a sip of champagne when a deep, too familiar voice murmured by her ear, "You're late," nearly choking on her drink. Charlotte turned, and of course there he was, Nathaniel Pierce, clad in a midnight black tuxedo, standing with casual elegance and an infuriatingly smug smirk. "What are you doing here?" she hissed under her breath. Nathaniel lifted his glass, his gray-blue eyes gleaming with amusement. "Main sponsor of the evening. Naturally, I had to attend." He leaned in just a fraction closer. "Besides, our little game isn't over yet." Charlotte shook her head with a small laugh. "Oh no, this game was just beginning. The charity auction, a dance of wits. The auction was held inside the grand ballroom of the Astoria Crown Hotel, bathed in the warm shimmer of crystal chandeliers. The crème de la crème of London's elite filled the space, aristocrats, business tycoons, and celebrities, all exchanging poised greetings and clinking glasses of vintage champagne. Charlotte, now draped in a deep crimson gown that made her skin glow, navigated the room with practiced ease. She wasn't intimidated by wealth or fame. On the contrary, she observed it, dissected it, and sometimes she enjoyed delivering sharp little truths that made the mighty squirm. She had just tucked a lock of hair behind her ear when that unmistakable voice broke through the crowd again. "We meet again." Exhaling softly, Charlotte turned, and sure enough, Nathaniel stood beside her, tuxedo flawless smirk firmly in place, as if he had orchestrated the entire night just to find her again. "You have an annoying habit of appearing wherever I am," she teased Nathaniel, shrugged with mock innocence. "Must be destiny." Charlotte laughed, the sound low and genuine. "You really need better lines." He only smiled and plucked a champagne flute from a passing tray, gesturing toward the stage where the auctioneer was whipping the crowd into excitement. "Are you planning to bid tonight?" he asked casually. Charlotte sipped her drink thoughtfully. "Depends. Is there anything actually worth bidding on?" One extravagant item after another, flashed by a rare painting, a bespoke diamond set an exclusive wine-tasting experience with a Michelin-starred chef. Charlotte remained largely unimpressed until the auctioneer announced something that caught everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed, "we now present an exclusive luxury getaway to Italy, private jet, 5-star accommodations, and Michelin dining experiences." The room buzzed with anticipation. The starting bid, £50,000. Charlotte's brows lifted with mild curiosity, watching as a few eager hands raised their paddles. The bidding was just warming up until a familiar voice cut through the air, deep composed, unshakable. 150,000! The entire ballroom fell into a stunned hush. Charlotte's head whipped to the side. Nathaniel Pierce had casually set down his champagne glass and lifted his paddle, looking every inch the man who got what he wanted, and wasn't shy about it. The auctioneer recovered quickly, voice bright. 150,000 from Mr. Pierce. Any higher bids? Silence. No one dared challenge the number. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Nathaniel Pierce. Applause echoed around the room, but Charlotte barely noticed. Nathaniel leaned back, exuding an infuriating sense of satisfaction. He turned to her, voice low enough only she could hear. "You didn't have to be so impressed." Charlotte arched a brow, unimpressed. "Who says I was?" He chuckled, lifting his glass once more. "Besides, who said I bought it for you?" Charlotte scoffed lightly, raising her own glass in mock salute. "I'll be sure to watch closely and see who the lucky guest is." Nathaniel didn't answer. He simply smiled, the kind of smile that promised the game between them had only just begun, and he had every intention of winning. Of course, Charlotte Winslow was ready to turn away, eager to leave this ridiculous night behind, when the auctioneer's voice rang out once more. And as tradition demands, the winning bidder must now announce the lucky guest accompanying them on this exquisite journey. The crowd fell silent, turning expectantly toward Nathaniel Pierce. He shifted his glass of champagne to one hand and turned to Charlotte, a glint of amusement and unmistakable challenge lighting up his stormy gaze. "Miss Winslow," he said, voice smooth as silk, "do you happen to like Italy?" Charlotte narrowed her eyes. "Are you seriously trying to bribe me with a luxury vacation?" Nathaniel took a long, unhurried sip of his champagne, then leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a teasing murmur only she could hear. "No, I'm just curious to see if you can resist." Charlotte let out a soft laugh, lifting her chin defiantly, but she didn't answer right away. Yes, she adored Italy. But more than that, she adored a good game, and Nathaniel Pierce had just raised the stakes, Florence. A game of unexpected turns. Nathaniel's private jet descended through the clear autumn skies, and from her window, Charlotte caught her first glimpse of Florence, a canvas of terracotta rooftops, ancient cobbled streets, and the Arno River cutting a silver path through the heart of the city. She had traveled the world for work, but Florence was something else entirely, a place stitched together by history and whispered legends. Yet the most unexpected part of this journey wasn't the breathtaking views. It was the man seated across from her. Nathaniel sat sprawled against the plush leather seat legs, crossed casually swirling a glass of fine Italian wine between his fingers. His gray-blue eyes lingered on her, unreadable but amused, ready to admit yet that this trip might be unforgettable. He asked, that faint smugness creeping into his tone. Charlotte scoffed lightly, tilting her head. "I'll decide after I see if the hotel serves breakfast in bed." Nathaniel chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that made her stomach tighten in the most annoying way. "Trust me," he murmured. "The service here will not disappoint you." There was something about the way he said it, the promise layered beneath the casual words, that made Charlotte realize this wasn't just a vacation. It was something neither of them had dared name. Yet Venice. A confession on the water. The next day took them to Venice. The crisp breeze danced across the glistening canals, and despite herself, Charlotte found the romance of the city seeping into her bones. What she hadn't expected was the private gondola Nathaniel had arranged, sleek, traditional, and absurdly picturesque. Charlotte almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Nathaniel Pierce, master of corporate empires, lounging lazily in a gondola like some casual tourist. It didn't fit him, and yet somehow it suited him perfectly. As they glided beneath the fading gold light, Charlotte tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but Nathaniel's hand was faster, his fingers brushing hers as he smoothed the hair away. The touch lingered longer than necessary, and when she looked up, his gaze was locked onto hers, so focused, so devastatingly intense that her heart skipped. "I always imagined CEOs like you preferred luxury yachts," she teased lightly, trying to diffuse the heat rising between them. Nathaniel smirked. "Occasionally, I prefer something more timeless." They drifted beneath the famed Rialto Bridge, its arches silhouetted against the sinking sun. Legend whispered that if two people kissed beneath the bridge at sunset, their love would be eternal. Nathaniel broke the silence. "Do you believe in legends?" His voice was low, almost reverent. Charlotte tilted her head, pretending to consider. "Which one?" "The one that says," he murmured, "if two people kiss under this bridge at sunset, they'll stay together forever." Charlotte laughed softly, shaking her head. "Are you planning to test that theory?" Nathaniel didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in and just brushed his lips against the corner of her mouth, a feather-light touch. Not demanding, not asking, just existing. Charlotte froze her breath, catching painfully in her chest. The world seemed to narrow to just the whisper of his mouth against her skin, the hush of the water around them, the pulse hammering in her ears. Nathaniel pulled back just slightly, his voice velvet smooth and devastatingly quiet. "Do you believe now?" Charlotte swallowed hard, forcing herself to find a steady breath. She lifted an eyebrow, keeping her tone teasing, despite the fire coiling low in her stomach. "I don't believe in legends," she said, with a slow, mischievous smile. "But I do believe in Italian wine and pizza." Nathaniel laughed deep and rich, but this time his eyes never left hers, and Charlotte knew with a strange certainty this game they were playing, it had just crossed a line neither of them could ever uncross. Something deeper than amusement. The next afternoon found Charlotte Winslow and Nathaniel Pierce wandering through the rolling vineyards of Tuscany. Here the air tasted different, cleaner, older, as if the earth itself whispered forgotten stories. The serenity was nothing like the lively hum of Venice. Tuscany was timeless, suspended between golden fields and endless blue skies. They sampled glasses of rich wine at every estate they visited, and Nathaniel always managed to stand just a little closer than necessary. so close that every time Charlotte glanced sideways, she caught him watching her with a quiet intensity that made her pulse stumble. As they strolled beneath a towering trellis heavy with ripe grapes, Charlotte rose on her toes to reach for a plump, purple cluster, but before her fingers brushed them, a larger hand moved ahead of hers. Nathaniel plucked the grapes effortlessly and turned to her, holding them out with a knowing look. "Do you always have to win?" Charlotte teased, lifting an eyebrow. Nathaniel merely shrugged his voice, calm and deliberate. "I don't compete, I just know what I want." She took the grapes from him, slowly, deliberately. As she bit into one, a sweet droplet of juice escaped, trailing down the corner of her mouth. Before she could wipe it away, Nathaniel reached out his thumb, brushing the drop from her skin, in a gesture so intimate, so unexpected, that Charlotte's breath caught in her chest. For a moment, the world seemed to still around them. No laughter, no teasing remarks. Just the heavy pull of something neither had intended to feel. Nathaniel's voice, low and rough, broke the silence. "I've never met anyone like you." Charlotte managed a small smile, trying to ignore the way her heart stumbled. "I thought a man like you had met every kind of woman by now." His gaze didn't waver. "None like you." And for the first time in a very long time, Charlotte Winslow realized she was standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than any story she had ever chased. Amalfi. No turning back. On their final night in Italy, they arrived in Amalfi, a place where the cliffs kissed the sea and pastel-colored houses clung stubbornly to the rock like jewels. After dinner, Charlotte was halfway to bidding Nathaniel good night when he reached for her hand. His grip was warm, grounding, filled with unspoken urgency. She turned to him, heart hammering against her ribs. Nathaniel stepped closer, the playful veneer he wore so easily gone. In its place was something raw, stripped bare. "I thought," he began, voice low and hoarse, "that this was just a game." Charlotte's breath hitched, but he didn't give her time to speak. "I was wrong," he said, the confession tumbling out with surprising vulnerability. "I don't want this to be just another trip. I don't want you disappearing on me again." Charlotte's fingers curled into her palm, fighting the storm rising inside her. Nathaniel reached out, tilting her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I'm not joking, Charlotte." His words were soft, but the conviction in his eyes stole all the air from her lungs. Her voice barely escaped. "What do you want from me?" Nathaniel didn't answer in words. Instead, he leaned down and kissed her a kiss that shattered all pretense, all careful walls. It was fierce and desperate and impossibly tender all at once. The kind of kiss that changed everything. And Charlotte knew irrevocably that she had already fallen. There was no turning back. The Pierce estate. Reality knocks. Returning to London meant facing the real world. And reality had a name: Margaret Pierce, Nathaniel's mother. A woman of sharp elegance, commanding presence and expectations so high they scraped the stars. The first meeting was set at the Pierce family estate, an imposing manor nestled on the outskirts of London, surrounded by immaculate grounds and echoing the kind of old wealth that needed no introduction. Charlotte, who rarely felt nerves, found herself smoothing her dress one extra time before stepping into the grand sitting room. Portraits of solemn ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. The air smelled faintly of roses and power. Margaret sat gracefully in an armchair by the fireplace, a delicate porcelain teacup balanced between her gloved fingers. Her sharp gray eyes raked over Charlotte with surgical precision. "Miss Winslow," she began, her voice smooth, but laced with an unmistakable edge, "I have heard quite a bit about you." Charlotte offered her most disarming smile. "I hope it was all flattering." Margaret set down her teacup, tilting her head slightly, a queen studying a challenger, a bold, outspoken journalist. She said, her tone betraying nothing of what she truly thought. "An unusual choice for my son." Charlotte merely smiled, wider, unbothered. She had weathered worse storms than the cool disapproval of society matriarchs, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not even Margaret Pierce, make her doubt what she and Nathaniel were building, no matter how perfect or how imperfect their path forward would be. Facing the matriarch, Charlotte Winslow kept her expression neutral as Margaret Pierce lifted her delicate teacup and studied her with the scrutiny of a seasoned queen judging an uninvited guest at court. "Let's just say," Margaret said smoothly, "not everything I've heard about you has been flattering." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, utterly unbothered. "Honesty is a virtue, Mrs. Pierce." Margaret's mouth tightened ever so slightly, before she shifted her sharp gaze to Nathaniel, who stood a few feet away, arms folded, watching the exchange like a silent chess master. "Son." Margaret's voice was calm, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. "How exactly did you find yourself involved with a journalist whose pen is sharper than most swords?" Charlotte opened her mouth to answer, but Nathaniel beat her to it. He stepped forward with easy authority, the tailored perfection of his charcoal suit somehow making him seem even more unshakable. "Mother," he said, voice light but firm, "if Charlotte didn't keep my life interesting, do you really think I'd waste my time with someone dull?" Charlotte blinked, momentarily stunned. She had been carefully plotting how to navigate this conversation with caution, but Nathaniel had cut through it with a single effortless defense, claiming her standing with her. Without hesitation, Margaret's face remained unreadable for a long moment. Then she sighed and set her cup down with a delicate clink. "Nathaniel, you've always been stubborn," she said, exasperation threading through her otherwise impeccable composure. "But remember, my dear, loving someone is one thing. Suitability for a lifetime is another." Nathaniel didn't so much as flinch. "Mother, I'm intelligent enough to know the difference between the two." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "Intelligence, darling, does not always guarantee wisdom." The air grew thick, tense, but Charlotte was no stranger to pressure. If Margaret Pierce thought she could intimidate her into backing away, she was about to learn otherwise. Charlotte leaned forward slightly, resting an elbow on the armrest, a small, almost mischievous smile curling her lips. "Mrs. Pierce, may I ask you a question?" Margaret arched a perfectly sculpted brow. "By all means." Charlotte's eyes gleamed with a quiet fire. "Do you honestly believe that a woman who fits perfectly into your idea of suitability would make Nathaniel truly happy?" For the first time, Margaret blinked, caught ever so slightly off guard. Charlotte's voice remained even, but there was an unmistakable edge of defiance beneath it. "Nathaniel isn't a man who thrives in safe, predictable routines. If he had wanted a life of quiet dinners and polite conversation, he would have found it by now. We wouldn't be standing here having this conversation, would we?" Nathaniel smirked, a slow, proud curl of his lips, watching her with something close to awe. Margaret was silent for a long beat, then finally stood smoothing the front of her pristine skirt. "You've made up your mind, then?" She said more, a statement than a question. Nathaniel's answer was immediate. "I have." Margaret sighed softly, resignation flickering in her eyes. "Then for your sake, Nathaniel, do not disappoint me." With that, she swept from the room, leaving an unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. Charlotte leaned back in her seat, casually lifting her teacup. "I'm pretty sure she's not planning to knit me a Christmas sweater anytime soon." Nathaniel chuckled lowly, moving to stand beside her. "Trust me, if she truly hated you, she wouldn't have been nearly that polite." Charlotte eyed him skeptically. "You sure about that?" Nathaniel leaned in his voice, dropping to a rough private murmur near her ear. "I'm sure about a lot of things, but the one thing I'm absolutely certain of—" He paused, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "Is you—" Charlotte blinked, feeling the ground shift again beneath her feet. Damn. She had thought she was playing this game on her terms, but somehow Nathaniel Pierce kept pulling her deeper. When the world started watching. It wasn't just Margaret Pierce who had opinions. The entire elite circle of London seemed to have nothing better to do than speculate about the unlikely pairing between the sharp-tongued journalist and the famously detached billionaire. The next morning, when Charlotte walked into the bustling newsroom with a cappuccino in hand, she could feel the energy shift instantly. Every head turned, every conversation paused mid-sentence. There was even a low whistle from one of the desks. Well, drawled Matt, one of her more incorrigible colleagues, as he leaned back in his chair, eyes twinkling with mischief. Looks like our queen of breaking headlines just became the headline herself. Charlotte calmly set her coffee on her desk, crossing her arms, one eyebrow raised in challenge. Careful, Matt, she said coolly. You're one bad metaphor away from getting your keyboard confiscated. The newsroom erupted in laughter, but underneath it all, Charlotte knew the real battle had only just begun. Because when the world starts watching, staying true to yourself becomes the hardest and most important thing you can do. And Charlotte Winslow had no intention of losing herself now. Whispers and warnings. At the bustling heart of the London Tribune newsroom, Charlotte Winslow leaned against her desk, a wry smile playing at the corner of her lips. Across from her, Matt, the political columnist, with a sharp tongue and an even sharper eye for gossip, raised an eyebrow. If you're a muse, Charlotte, you're the kind that inspires revolutions, not poetry. Before she could answer, Linda, her closest friend and the Tribune's senior editor, chimed in, her voice laced with genuine concern. Are you sure about this? Nathaniel Pierce isn't exactly famous for commitment. Charlotte took a slow sip of her coffee, her expression unchanging. Linda pressed on, serious now. He's known for deals that leave rivals in ashes and romances that vanish almost as fast as they begin. In the finance world, they call him the silent hurricane. The press, they call him the ruthless charmer. Charlotte smiled faintly. I'm aware, Linda. I'm a journalist, remember? Matt folded his arms, studying her like a particularly puzzling headline. So tell us, is this just another story for you? Or do you actually think someone like him can change? Charlotte hated being interrogated, but for once she let the question sit before answering, her voice calm, unwavering. If this is a game, then I intend to play it better than anyone ever has. And if it's real— She paused, meeting their eyes evenly. Then I'll still be standing at the end with both my heart and my dignity intact. For a moment, the newsroom held its breath. Then Matt let out a low laugh. God, you really do convince yourself you can survive anything. Linda, however, remained solemn, reaching out to squeeze Charlotte's hand. Just be careful. You're not as invincible as you pretend to be. Charlotte returned the squeeze, her voice gentle but sure. If anyone needs to be cautious here, Linda, it's Nathaniel. The world watching. Across the city, London's elite circles were buzzing. Have you heard Nathaniel Pierce, the man who's allergic to emotional entanglements, is apparently dating a journalist? Not a socialite, not an heiress. A journalist with a pen sharp enough to tear down empires. The whispers only grew louder, morphing into headlines splashed across society columns. Fire meets ice, Charlotte Winslow and Nathaniel Pierce, a battle or a love story. And Nathaniel heard it all. That evening, lounging on the leather sofa of his penthouse, he scrolled through yet another speculative article about their relationship. I seem to have become the hottest topic in London without even scheduling a press conference, he muttered dryly. Charlotte, perched nearby with a book in hand, glanced up and smirked. Welcome to my reality. Nathaniel leaned back, his gray-blue eyes glinting with something dangerously close to amusement. Your world is fascinating. She shrugged, teasing. You still have time to back out, Pierce. Nathaniel chuckled low and deep, closing the distance between them in a few lazy strides. One hand braced itself on the back of her chair as he leaned down close enough for her heart to betray her by skipping a beat. Do I look like the kind of man who runs? He murmured. Charlotte forced herself to stay composed, to not let his nearness rattle her. No, she said smoothly, lifting a hand and placing it firmly against his chest to push him back just slightly, just enough. You're the type who sees a challenge and refuses to back down." He smiled, then slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. "Exactly." Their game, their dance continued, even as the world watched with bated breath. Through every sharp whisper, every sidelong glance from London's high society, neither Charlotte Winslow nor Nathaniel Pierce retreated. Because this was no longer just a battle of wills, it was something far more dangerous and infinitely more thrilling. London nights and quiet promises. The evening chill had settled over the city, but inside their favorite little cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner of Mayfair, the warmth wrapped around them like an old song. Charlotte sat opposite Nathaniel, a steaming cappuccino in one hand, idly twirling a silver spoon in the other. Her laughter filled the space between them as she recounted some biting tale about the ridiculous unspoken wars waged between London's high society wives. Nathaniel, usually so composed, leaned back in his chair, watching her, with the kind of expression that stripped away all pretense, an expression that said, if there was a war to fight, he would pick her side every single time. And for the first time in a long time, Charlotte wondered if maybe the risk of falling had been worth it after all. A quiet proposal in a noisy world. The winter's charity gala buzzed with muted laughter and clinking glasses, but Nathaniel Pierce wasn't paying attention to any of it. Across the room, Charlotte Winslow sat bathed in golden light, animated, laughing at some whispered joke, her eyes bright with life. The woman who had once been just a story, a spark of curiosity, had become something infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more precious. How long had it been now? 6 months, a year. Time had become irrelevant where she was concerned. Nathaniel set down his untouched glass of Bordeaux, the decision in his heart, burning clearer than anything he had ever signed, built, or conquered. He leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but unwavering. "Charlotte, do you remember that argument we had about who the better strategist was?" She looked up at him, arching a brow with that familiar glint of amusement. "Oh, I remember. I told you if you could wait outside my door for 2 hours, maybe I'd believe you were serious." Nathaniel chuckled lowly. "Exactly. And tonight I'm not here to play any more games." He stood, his movements smooth, confident, yet if you looked closer there was something vulnerable hidden beneath the perfection of his tailored suit. Crossing the room, he pulled something from behind the cafe counter, clearly planned in advance. When he turned back, he held a small velvet box beautifully crafted, and then he did something that made the entire cafe fall into stunned silence. He knelt. "Charlotte Winslow." He began, voice steady, but rough with emotion. "You are brilliant, fearless, impossible to predict. And that's exactly why I don't just want a chapter with you, I want the whole story." Her breath hitched. "I want the arguments, the laughter, the unexpected twists. I want every stubborn debate and every quiet evening. I want it all. Will you let me spend forever trying and probably failing to outmatch you?" For once in her fiercely independent life, Charlotte found herself without a single clever retort. Nathaniel waited, a flicker of nervousness breaking through his normally unshakable composure. "You're not planning your escape route, are you?" he teased, breaking the tension and making the entire cafe erupt into laughter. Charlotte blinked back, the sudden heat in her eyes, then laughed too, that wild, free sound that Nathaniel had fallen hopelessly in love with. She reached for him, cupping his face in her hand. "I used to think you were just a game I was clever enough to win," she whispered. "But you waited for me, rainshine, and every stubborn silence in between, so my answer is yes." Applause broke out all around them. Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady even as his heart raced. "Good," he murmured, lips brushing her knuckles, "because I may or may not have already planned our honeymoon." Charlotte narrowed her eyes in mock suspicion. "Already aren't you supposed to wait until after the wedding?" Nathaniel grinned, that wicked spark in his eyes. "After all those times you made me wait, darling, this time I'm not letting you walk away first." She laughed a real, unguarded laugh before tugging him up from the ground and pulling him into a kiss that silenced the crowd. In that moment, there were no winners or losers. There was only them and the beginning of something neither had dared dream of. London's most unpredictable wedding news of their engagement spread like wildfire. Every corner of London's elite society buzzed about the most unlikely, most captivating match in years. Nathaniel Pierce, the cold, unshakable titan of industry, and Charlotte Winslow, the fiery journalist who had never bowed to anyone. Whispers filled the streets, the salons, the boardrooms. Some predicted disaster. Some predicted scandal. But no one could predict what was coming next. Their wedding wasn't held in some sterile ballroom or over-polished cathedral. It took place at an ancient castle on the edge of the English countryside, a place that had seen centuries of battles, victories, and new beginnings. The invitation had read simply, "Come witness a battle of wits and a celebration of surrender." And truly, it was neither a victory nor a surrender. It was something better, something utterly their own. A wedding, like no other. The castle was alive with energy, not the stiff, rehearsed atmosphere expected from London's elite, but something vibrant, chaotic, beautifully true. Instead of sterile floral arrangements and endless speeches, Nathaniel Pierce and Charlotte Winslow had crafted a day that was unapologetically theirs. The ancient stone walls were draped with banners printed with their most infamous quotes, the witty, savage exchanges that had defined their relationship long before either of them realized it was love. Each one drew laughter from the crowd and affectionate shakes of the head from family and friends who had watched them spar stumble and fall headfirst into something extraordinary. Charlotte walked down the aisle not in a gown that conformed to tradition, but in one that embodied her entirely sleek daring, stitched with subtle lines from her most iconic articles. Across her sheer veil in the most delicate silver thread were phrases that had once brought CEOs to their knees and had now brought her to this moment. Nathaniel, ever the perfectionist, wore a sharp black suit, but hidden inside, stitched along the lining of his jacket, was a quiet secret. "I waited 2 hours outside your door." There were no drawn-out vows. Instead, the master of ceremonies regaled the guests with hilarious tales of their infamous debates, including the time Charlotte had publicly outwitted Nathaniel during a televised forum on economic policy. When it was Nathaniel's turn to speak, he simply lifted his glass. His gaze locked on hers, steady, warm, completely. Hers. "Charlotte, you're the only woman who ever dared to walk away from me, and the only one who made me want to be left behind forever." The room roared with laughter, but even through the smiles and the clinking glasses more than a few eyes misted over. All the doubts, the gossip, the warnings from high society, none of it mattered anymore. Because in that room, one truth was clear. This was real. This was love. 1 year later, perfect chaos. Anyone who had bet marriage would tame them clearly didn't know Charlotte and Nathaniel Pierce. If anything, their lives grew even more wildly beautiful. Debates over breakfast options were fought with the same passion as global business mergers. Arguments about child-rearing strategies ended with tickle fights and midnight takeout runs. But the biggest change wasn't just in their routines, it was in the tiny, messy, miraculous chaos that had entered their world. Times 2, Ethan and Elise Pierce the twins, 2 tiny hurricanes with Nathaniel's calculating stare and Charlotte's wicked grin. Even at just 2 years old, their personalities were unmistakable. Ethan quiet, observant, dangerously clever. Elise, loud, defiant with a sass that could make even Charlotte proud. Nathaniel Pierce, the man who once negotiated billion-pound deals without blinking, now found himself utterly defeated on a daily basis by 2 toddlers and a glitter-covered sippy cup. One particularly unforgettable moment. During a press conference, little Elise had wriggled away from the nanny, climbed onto the podium with the charm of a seasoned politician, and announced, "My daddy burnt the toast." The entire room had exploded with laughter. Nathaniel, adjusting his tie with grim determination, had only managed to mutter, "Damage control will commence immediately." Later that night, after the chaos subsided, Ethan had curled up between them, serious as only a small child could be. "Mummy, Daddy," he said, tiny hands folded earnestly. "In your wedding pictures, why does Mummy look so happy, and why does Daddy look like he's found treasure?" Charlotte grinned, nudging Nathaniel playfully. "Because your father knows," she said, eyes twinkling. "Without me, life would be painfully boring." Nathaniel gathered his son into his arms, his voice soft and full of truth. "No, my boy, it's because without her, I never would have won the game that truly mattered." The truth was, the game between them had never really ended. But somewhere along the way, they had both realized something far more important. In love and life, the only victory worth winning was the one they fought for together. Through the unpredictable days, the messy nights, the chaos, the laughter, they weren't playing to win anymore. They were playing and living to love, and in that, they had already won everything: unconditional love. In the end, there was no winner, no final victory to claim, no battle left to fight. Because Charlotte and Nathaniel had already discovered the greatest treasure of all, a love that asked for nothing but gave everything. A love that didn't demand perfection, but found beauty in every imperfection. A love that didn't just endure the storms, but danced through them. Together, they had rewritten the rules. Together, they had built a life richer than any fortune, stronger than any empire. In their story, love wasn't the prize at the end, it was the journey. The laughter, the stubborn debates over toast, the whispered promises in the dark, the fierce loyalty, the fearless trust, the hand reaching out, always reaching out, even when things got messy, complicated, real. It was unconditional. It was everything, and it was theirs. And so their story was never about winning or losing. It was about choosing to stay, choosing to trust, choosing love, even when it was the riskier move. From chance encounters to lifelong promises, from battles of wit to whispered confessions under foreign skies, Charlotte and Nathaniel proved that the best games are the ones where you both win, because you're fighting not against each other but side by side. Their love wasn't perfect, it was real, and sometimes that's the most extraordinary kind of love there is. If this story moved, made you smile, or made you believe again, in second chances, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that touch the soul. Until next time, keep believing in the magic of beginnings.